right. Well, it's the top of the hour, so welcome everyone. For anyone I haven't met before, my name is Garnet with the CWA. Thanks for being here. We've run a number of webinars. I'm sure some of you have seen them over the past few weeks, and we'll keep doing them going forward. But thanks for joining this one because I think it's important. I think it's important for us to get some specific information for the Canadian gyms going. Your government's doing an excellent job, or probably a variety of opinions on that, but your government's doing a great job at getting some support to you guys. So this call is going to be a pretty open forum. We can discuss anything that you'd like to. Um, and so for the agenda, we'll cover some ground rules. I'll give you a quick tutorial on how to use Zoom and how we're going to deal with questions and answers and all that for anyone who hasn't been on one of our calls before. And then we'll just have a, like I said, a fairly open discussion. So as we're going along here and starting, just start typing your questions into the question and answer box. And if you don't know where that is, I'll cover it shortly in this quick tutorial. So with Zoom, what you're seeing right now is what is what we're here. The key parts here are the audio settings. So if you do need to use your microphone, you can just make sure you have the right microphone selected down there in the lower left. There's a chat feature in the Zoom, which we'll be using, so you can talk amongst yourselves or ask questions to singular panelists. If you want to talk amongst themselves, make sure you change that to field from all panelists to panelists and attendees. Then everyone in the call will be able to see your chats. So if you're sharing links or anything like that, make sure you select that correctly. And then, as I mentioned, the best place to put your questions is going to be in that question and answer box. With that box, you'll be able to upvote other questions. So if you look in there and you see a question that you might have that's already been asked, just upvote it, and that'll make sure that we pay attention to it and get it answered. And then last but not least, like I said, it's going to be a very open discussion, so we're hoping to hear from you guys. Down at the very lower center of your screen, there's a little button that says raise hand. So if you'd like to answer a question out loud or just contribute to the conversation, go ahead and click raise hand, and I'll try to moderate this and give you a chance to speak. When I do unmute you, you'll get a little pop-up that looks like this. So just click unmute yourself, and then it'll be your turn to speak. We have some pretty simple ground rules we've used for all our calls, and they've worked really well. Just asking everyone to be polite and respectful, which I know will not be a problem for Canadians, but is for other people. Keep any personal political commentary out of this call, just to keep the conversation as smooth and flowing as possible. Don't want to get into any too serious of a debate on anything. When I do unmute you and you get a chance to speak your mind, just keep your comments to about 2 minutes. That way there's enough time for everybody to contribute. And anyone who does abuse any of those principles or abuse each other, we will remove them just to keep the conversation going. I was going to start with a little bit of an industry status update. It's a easier one for Canada than it is for us down in the States, because you have a little bit more of a unified situation of basically all climbing gyms in Canada being closed, and most businesses even. But just to give you an idea of what that looks like and which provinces have more or less climbing gyms, I thought I'd make this little map so you could see some of the harder hit areas. One of the big questions that we always get, so if this comes up, how long are we going to be closed? I think that's something that similar to down here in the States, that'll probably be province by province for you guys. But if any of you guys have any insights to that, definitely feel free to share, whether it's something that you've heard from your local provincial government or just a way that you're constructing your own planning. That's the biggest question I think on everyone's minds is, how long are we going to be closed? Some of the stimulus that is available to you guys, which hopefully you all already know about and are looking at applying for or talking to your banks about. But just for anyone who isn't, I'll go through it really quickly, and then any questions that come about this, definitely feel free to type them into that question and answer box, and we'll get that addressed by everyone here. So just as of March 27th or March 31st, with the stimulus package that was passed, you do have access to certain wage subsidies. Sounds like there'll be a little bit of a delay in getting those funds potentially, but I'd love to hear anyone on this call's experience with their application or eligibility for those programs. They, from my view, it seems like it's a fairly generous program, a little bit of a cap on the salary that they're subsidizing, and there's some minimum qualifications around revenue loss. I would imagine most climbing gyms aren't going to have too much of a problem meeting those qualifications. And then I think one of the subtle things there is that it's I think up to a 3-month maximum subsidy, and I think that timing is based on either March 15th if you want it retroactive, or I believe it can be placed going forward when you apply for that program as well. Pretty early on, your government launched the business credit availability programs, and there's about 3 or 4 different loan programs it looks like that you're eligible for. But one of the key ones I thought I'd surface is this emergency program, which some of you might have already applied for, which is an interest-free loan from your government for $40K. With a possibility of a 25% forgiveness if you're able to repay that before 2022, and I think that's December 31st, 2022. So you have the entire year. There are some eligibility requirements. I thought one of the key ones to surface here is that it looks like your main eligibility is based on your payroll, so you have paid a minimum of $50K in payroll for the 2019 tax year. And then the last thing that I thought I'd just surface for the group is just the tax deferment and the filing extensions that you have, or I'm sorry, payment extensions that you have available. It looks like with your sales tax remittance, there's a variety of situations out there. So look to your own business leaders and what your own financing looks like. But regardless whether you're monthly, quarterly, or yearly, there's some benefits there for deferments, and hopefully it'll help you guys with your cash flow. And then the other one that I saw that looked pretty key, just to help, again, deal with cash flow, is that any sort of income tax payments that you have aren't due in March as they normally would be, but can be made all the way through September 1st without any penalty. So I'm going to have Alexandra share a little bit about what we're doing at the CWA to keep on top of and pay attention to Canadian-specific issues.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I have been leading our advocacy efforts specifically for Canada as well. This is a little bit new for us. So with volunteer input, we're able to put together a bit of a more specific campaign plan that really speaks to the needs of our Canadian members. I wanted to talk about the fact that we have identified 3 Canadian groups and organizations with which we are actively pursuing advocacy partnerships. Save Small Business is an active grassroots Canadian small business lobbying group. Their campaign strongly speaks to the needs of our Canadian membership base. I've had numerous Canadian volunteers reach out to me and outline the ways in which the Save Small Business campaign is hitting the aspects of relief measures that have currently been sort of glossed over by Canadian Parliament, but that are really critical. So we are hoping to align with them, and I'll be pursuing a conversation with a representative from that organization tomorrow. The Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses is the largest nonprofit that I know of, Canadian nonprofit that's devoted specifically to creating an economy where Canadian small businesses can succeed. It's a nonpartisan organization, and it has a really strong advocacy arm. And the reason why I am hoping to partner with them in the long term is because while the Save Small Business group is really vocal and active at the moment, we also want to build in Canadian advocacy programs that are sustainable and that will have access to and be able to provide resources a lot more swiftly in future emergencies. For Climbing Escalade Canada, I believe we have actually a representative from Climbing Escalade Canada on this call, so thank you so much for joining us. We're very interested in partnering with the CEC, as they are the nationwide regulatory body for climbing. I'm sure you're all much more familiar than I am, but they also have connections to provincial climbing organizations, and through that, we have the power to amplify our efforts. So those are the 3 groups that we're currently aligning with. If you wouldn't mind bumping to the next slide for me, Garnet. Thank you. So what are we fighting for? The federal government in Canada has recently announced expanded resources to support Canadian small businesses. So what we're really focusing right now is commercial rent abatement. The reason why this is our focus, as I'm sure many of you have already read about and experienced through the news, there will be many permanent local small businesses that are closing after rent is due in April, which already happened, and then again in May. So if it wasn't a killer blow for a lot of folks in April, it is imminent. And if economic recovery in Canada is supposed to be robust, it's really crucial for as many of these businesses as possible to be ready to reopen as soon as social distancing is eased up. A concern is that with the current framework, it's really debt that is going to be used to support local small businesses. Debt from the government, debt in terms of taking interest-based deferral rent options from landlords and just having to pay that back later, even though the revenue has not come in. And we want to make sure that there are solutions to support climbing gyms and, of course, all small businesses in Canada that are not debt solutions to their forced closures. So our view is that it's fundamentally unfair asking businesses like climbing gyms to close to protect the community and then asking them to take on potentially limitless debt for the foreseeable future to make sure that costs like basic things of rent, phone bills, whatever other debts might be involved are paid in full. And we think that there needs to be more equitable burden sharing in the Canadian small business world right now. The solution that we are trying to offer is that in order for tenants to be successful, there needs to be a national strategy with a very specific approach that will relieve landlords of concerns about leniency that might become a pattern or of not being able to make mortgage payments. And we want to make it easier for them to work with tenants to ensure the survival of Canadian climbing gyms. So as a matter of both fairness and effectiveness, rent abatement in some form will be required in order to save local small businesses during the crisis. The policy recommendation overall is have the federal government pay landlords directly in exchange for waiving rent. And that is what we are working toward at the moment. All right, next slide, Garnet. Thank you. Volunteer recruitment. In order to make this happen, we are based out of the United States, but we are here to serve you. And in order to do that with the greatest efficiency and the greatest accuracy and precision, we need insight from the folks who are most affected. So we currently have a very strong and insightful group of volunteers representing a number of different provinces throughout Canada. But rent abatement may end up being a provincial fight. And if that turns out to be the case, then we will definitely need more climbing gym representatives from the provinces that are currently up on your screen. Those provinces currently do not have volunteer representatives collaborating with the CWA, and we are here for you and would very much value your voice and your insight and making sure that your province is well represented and not overlooked in any sense. So that is what we're doing. If you are interested in joining our team, feel free to register. There's a volunteer registration link on our website, and it'll put you in direct contact with me. I'll be able to connect you with the Canadian volunteers we already have, and we'll be able to leverage, thanks Garnet, it's at the bottom of the screen. We'll be able to leverage the network to be able to make greater progress in coalition with the groups that I mentioned.
All right, thanks, Alexandra. So yeah, we'll start jumping into the open discussion forum. So please use that raise hand function at the bottom and we'll unmute you. We do have a few people who've agreed to join us just to be prepared to speak and answer some questions. So we've got on the line Walson Tai from Calgary Climbing. We have Kenneth Cronin from Crag X, who's also on the CWA's board. And we have Heather Reynolds, who does a lot of work with the CWA on the certification side and has years of experience in the climbing industry. And I'm sure we'll have great ideas for this call. And then just added in Christiane Marceau from the CEC. So she was a little active in the chat there, and I think she'll have some really useful information for you guys. There was one question that got typed into the box about how many people are on this call. Right now, we have 72 total, including Alexandra and myself, and pretty much everyone else is Canadian besides the two of us from me scrolling through the list here. So uh, let's see. One thing I left out of the my little preamble that I thought I'd highlight that I saw someone did bring up in the chat is that your government is encouraging you for those wage subsidies that you are eligible up to 100% forgiveness or subsidy on 75% of your employees' pay. The government is encouraging you to pay that other 25% if possible. So I think that probably is a part of the good faith effort for some of these rules. And the other thing I just noticed, which I hadn't caught, is that 30% revenue loss number that I talked about to be eligible for those wage subsidies apparently has been lowered to 15%. So I guess keep an eye on that if you are lucky enough not to have kept your revenue loss in that range. So the first question we have that someone's typed in is what is this wage subsidy? Is it in the form of a reimbursement or a tax deferment or tax subsidy? I'm not sure. So if anyone out there knows and would like to share, feel free to speak up.
Hi, it's Kenneth Cronin. I just got off of a Zoom meeting with Ceridian, who I use for my payroll, and things aren't ironed out yet, but it looks like major payroll companies are going to be part of the wage subsidy. So I don't know how it'll work for people who don't use a payroll company, but I know that the big three payroll companies, you'll process your pay as normal, and then they will just take 25% instead of 75%. That is how they explained it as of an hour ago, but it's a moving target, of course.
All right,
if
thanks,
I
Kenneth.
may jump in as well, Christiane here. I've been on a couple of calls with TOC and other organizations about those programs. In terms of the wage, the legislation isn't out yet, so it should be, the details of it should be published. We're hoping this week, maybe next week. But it would be employers have to apply directly to the government, and the government would be sending in funds directly to the organization in order to be able to continue paying your staff as you were doing prior to this issues.
All right, thank you. And then just to back up one beat from that, for anyone who hasn't applied for this yet, just so you know, I believe that the way to apply is you just go to the Canada Revenue Agency My Business Account portal, and they have information there and a form for you to apply. So that would be the first course of action is going there. And then please, anyone correct me if I'm wrong about that. Yeah. All right. So let's see, I'll put another question out there. Someone has typed in a question. Have there been examples of countries that have put through commercial rent abatement? And not that I've seen. In the States down here, we have a few states and then also a few local municipalities who have. I think it's a harder thing to enforce, but I think if there was a country that was going to do it, Canada would be in a unique position to be able to facilitate a program like that, probably better than the United States could.
I will say that based on a quick Google search, so this is not the most in-depth answer that I could provide, but I do see that although I haven't seen an official policy passed nationwide globally yet, I can see that countries like Australia are absolutely having the same kind of conversation and the same debate, and it looks promising. So, and that's specific for commercial properties. So even though that it might not be implemented on a large scale worldwide yet, I think that Canada and Australia are leading the charge at the moment, and it's only a matter of time.
All right. Let's see here. Okay. Well, yeah. So, guys, please, just type in any questions into that question and answer box. and we'll get those answered. But I'll pose a question to you out there. So please, someone raise your hand and share your experience. I'm curious to know what sort of time period a lot of you are planning for, whether you are have heard anything from your local governments in terms of when you can reopen. I believe a lot of the current mandates are going through the middle of April for most of the provinces. I know Ontario and Quebec specifically are middle of April. But for your business planning, what are you projecting for your own gyms, and how do you envision reopening? Are you going to be reopening for the entire public, for your members only? Let's hear from Reed Monk on that question, or anything else that you'd like to say, Reed. All right, you should be able to hit unmute yourself, Reed, and we'll have you speak. I will say from some of the calls we've had, and maybe some of you have been on them, but it seems down in the US, most people are planning in the 2-month time period. Probably about like 60% or so of people are planning in that time period of being able to reopen and start to conduct some amount of business. And then probably the next greatest category of folks would be in the 6-month time period. And then after that, people thinking in the 1-month time frame of being able to reopen. Yeah. And then obviously there's the planning of reopening, and then there's the planning of how to rebuild your finances after all this as well. So yeah, anyone who'd like to speak around any of those questions, feel free to raise your hand. We've got a couple other questions that are coming in. And then around this topic, has anyone seen examples of what gyms are putting in place or having to do after reopening? So again, feel free to raise your hand, and you can speak to what you're doing in your gym around that question. From the CWA's standpoint, we're gathering a lot of hygiene and cleaning resources, and we'll be putting out some sort of guidance on what we feel will be some good, solid recommendations that you might want to build your own programs on top of. We'll also be introducing hygiene and cleanliness posters through our Climb Smart program, so you can have some basic level communication to your members as they come in as to what we would suggest to do as good hygiene when climbing in this interim period of what we're going to be dealing with for the next few months after we are able to start reopening. Has anyone here on the panel thought about or started putting any policies into place around reopening?
Yeah, I have. It's Kenneth Cronin calling again. So our local health authority has said May 30th. It's the earliest that the state of closure could possibly be lifted. And one of the things that I've done is I responded to that to talk to tell them that I'm interested in talking with them about what it would look like when we do reopen. As our letter had us classified along with yoga studios and fitness places and cycle places. I think it's very important that your local health authority has some idea that we are very different. I've seen the comments Jean-Marc is suggesting that businesses will have to be asking people to be 2 meters apart. And I think that we should take advantage of the fact that we can offer 2 meters of distance in 3 dimensions, that we don't have capacity rules placed on us based strictly on floor space. I think that the way for us to do that is to respond to our local health authorities with the idea that we are thinking about it, and that we do have some special concerns as climbing gyms about how it is that we're going to respond. And I think also it's important that if we're going to make any announcements of what we're going to do, because there's an instinct that you want to tell people what it's going to look like, is we should try to avoid doing that on our own, a single gym at a time. Some things are good to keep secret for competitive reasons, but at every gym in town, you should be talking to another about what kinds of things they're going to do in their town. The health authorities are particularly local, so and the mood of your city will have a lot to do with it. So I think you need to talk with other people in your town about what you're going to do, because we have to be able to sustain anything that we announce, and it's important that we don't, in sort of an eagerness to be safe, put out, or we'll script polls every day, we'll have masks all the time, we'll do all these kinds of things that we're not able to sustain. And if one person in a market does it, it kind of sets the tone of the discussion, and then everybody needs to walk back from that. So it's not really an answer to the question of what things am I going to do, but I think it's important that we talk about how we're going to do what we're going to do and how we're going to let people know about it, and that we're not too eager to turn this into taking off your shoes at the airport after 9/11, you know?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. Some of the discussions I've seen down here in the States, and I would imagine it's probably on some people's minds in Canada as well, because it's kind of an easy-ish solution to this problem. Rather than for a business to be able to ensure that everyone stays 2 meters apart, there might be the possibility of taking a look at what your current occupancy allowances are, usually based on fire codes, and take some sort of factor of that occupancy. Down here in the US, supermarkets and some public businesses that are open are doing that. And I know there's some talk at the state and local municipality level of implementing that for other businesses as well, restaurants, bars, and I would assume gyms. Another thing I was going to follow up on Kenneth's point is I think it was a really good idea to speak to the value of putting out some of this messaging and these efforts in a group fashion. And I would even look beyond the climbing industry for that, as Kenneth started his comments with. There are other businesses that are going to be potentially affected with similar stigma that we might have in the climbing world. So at the CWA, we are looking at coordinating and keeping in touch with some of the major fitness associations that are out there, so that we can hopefully make sure that no one in this kind of member-based, fitness-based wellness world is affected by any unnecessary or non-evidence-based stigma after we start pulling out of this pandemic. It looked like Jean-Marc had something he'd like to say on this topic, so I'm just going to unmute you, Jean-Marc, and feel free to jump in.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of share some thoughts about that question that I asked. I agree with Kenneth. I think it'll make a lot more sense if we are all working off of the same sort of operational measures that we're taking to keep people safe within our facilities. I have been watching sort of what's happening as much as I can in Asia, where places are reopening or still operating. And I've seen things like in bouldering gyms, some of them having tape down on the mats, and you can only have one person per zone at a time, and everyone's wearing a mask. And we've discussed with our partners different ideas, like having these sort of mobile hand washing stations that you can rent or buy and have them in the gym. Because I think the way I'm seeing, you know, how this is, one of the earlier questions was how long are you planning for? And I have a feeling that we'll be able to reopen during the summer at some point, or, you know, beginning of the summer, depending on the province, but we'll be able to reopen with very strict guidelines. Like I was mentioning in my question, like I really think they're going to say you can only reopen if you can keep people 2 meters apart. There will likely be a second wave, you know, in the fall. We might have to close again, in which case we will probably want to have a different, I mean, I think everybody in Canada, more or less, except for a few gyms, have, you know, frozen their memberships for free and allowed people to opt in if they wanted to support the gym, with varying degrees of success. But I do think that if there is that second wave, and I really think that there will be another wave of closures in the fall, that we sort of plan to talk to our members about that and make sure that they understand that it's not viable for us to do this again a second time for another few months. So yeah, those are just my couple of thoughts on those two issues.
All right, thanks, Jean-Marc. And I think Christian had some thing to contribute on this topic as well.
Yes, hi. I just want to address a little bit in regard of Sports Canada. So maybe that could be some information that you guys would be interested in. So as you know, CEC is funded by Sports Canada through the Olympic cycle. And one of the things that Sports Canada have been doing right now is that they've reached out to all the national sports organization and asked us to submit a report of the impact of the current situation on the NSO and on practice of the sport in general in Canada. So we have a couple of specific questions that we have to answer. But one of them is asking, what could Sports Canada look into in terms of support to help the community get back in participation within the sport? So I think what you guys are talking about as being like the expert on the ground in the climbing gym is extremely speaking to me right now for this report, in the sense that I think we could ask from Sports Canada for some funding to help develop a policy for gym in terms of reopening, in terms of 2 meter apart, the limit of capacity, the cleanliness, and so on and so on. I think we could put together a task force with some owners that would be interested. We could get you guys together and we can look at some funding. Sports Canada, get something out as a recommended or a helping tool for owners. I'm putting this out there. I don't know if there's any interest, but that's something CEC could facilitate, and we could have access to some support from Sports Canada as well.
Yeah, and if that group does get formed, I think the CWA would be happy to share any of the things that we learn about best practices for hygiene or cleaning as well. Looks like I've got one other person with our hand raised. Let's hear from Gabriel, or Gabriel, depending on the pronunciation.
Thanks, Garnet. It's Gabriel.
All right.
I'm piggybacking on what that last person said. I'm sorry, I'm not good with names, and what Jean-Marc de la Plante said as well. I'm kind of representing a gym in Quebec City, and I was thinking about reaching out to our local PSA and maybe some other gyms so we could start having that conversation about what we plan on doing and what we could prove the government or the health organizations of our government that we can put in place to prove to them that we can keep our gyms safe for the customers that we plan on having in our gyms when the reopening will happen. So I was, as much as I want that conversation to be had so that the sports organizations can start talking about maybe funding or help, I would actually encourage gyms to contact themselves or to work together and to work with the local PSAs to start having that conversation of what we're going to put in place and try to have it put in place throughout the gyms in every province so that they're, let's say, so we can create a standard in a sense.
Great, thanks, Gabriel. So we had kind of piggybacking into, or diving down into some of the specifics around those questions as well. One of the questions in there is someone wants to know if there's another way to keep the holds on the wall clean without taking them all off and scrubbing them. Kenneth would like to speak to that, so I'll let you go, Kenneth.
Yeah, so I think that instinct to get our holds clean is a good one, and it's totally understandable in how we are now. But making promises about cleaning holds or trying to figure out how to clean holds is kind of exactly the kind of thing that we can't do, and we can't offer. There's no system that would work cleaning holds in between. So I think one of the things that we're going to have to be prepared to do a little bit, because we are a business where people touch things with their hands, is we're going to actually have to do a little bit of pushing back on the idea that touching things with your hands is something that has to stop for forever. And so I think probably we're going to have to be the ones who go through the mental tricks first to be okay with the fact that no, things you touch can hurt you. But in order for this industry to survive, people are going to have to accept that risk. And the risk is not touching the hold; it's touching the hold and then putting the hand in your mouth or in your eyes. And the same way that the risk in climbing is not the harness, it's the harness correctly. I think we need to really put this kind of stuff in that same package of approach to risk that we have done with everything else that's risky in our business. And that's education and the responsibility of the climber to do the thing that'll keep them safe. And this is just another thing that they need to be educated on. So I really would resist spending too much time trying to think about how to make your gym a more sterile environment, and instead spend time thinking about how you're going to wrap good hand hygiene and good respiratory hygiene into your beginner lessons, how your orientation in your bouldering gym is going to add that kind of stuff. Telling somebody about a risk, telling somebody how to mitigate that risk, and leaving the responsibility on them. I think that is really, I think, our only option.
Yeah, I think those are great comments, Kenneth. That definitely mirrors a lot of my thinking personally around this issue, and reflects a lot of the evidence and science that's at least currently available. You could sterilize your holds if it was even possible every day, and the second that someone climbs on them, you've got a problem. And there's just not going to be a way for a climbing gym to feasibly clean routes in between each climber. And then also to highlight what Kenneth was saying, the transmission risk there isn't, it's hard to say. There isn't tons of evidence yet, so a lot of this is really developing. It's something that we're keeping a close eye on. But as Kenneth mentioned, it definitely is the case. It's not a problem touching the hold. It's what you do after you touch the hold thing. So something as simple as encouraging, or I don't know about mandating, but strongly encouraging, washing hands between routes for people who felt that was the measure that they needed to take would not be a bad idea. And that would piggyback off of the comments I believe Jean-Marc said about mobile hand washing stations. There's another question in the comments here that's in this similar vein about whether the pH of chalk is high enough to deactivate the virus. I wouldn't say it's fake news. I think it's a really intriguing idea. I think that from the evidence I've looked at, there's something there, but the key would be that you'd have to mix that chalk up with water into a solution. Just powdered chalk doesn't technically really have an active pH. It's not going to be destroying things, or it doesn't have a pH that's available enough to rise to that level. So it's a really intriguing idea, and it might be part of some other future cleaning product that some genius invents, I could imagine. But at least for right now, you're not getting any protection. I would not assume you're getting any protection from your powdered chalk at least as it pertains to viruses. And it's going to take some time. That was going to be the last comment I had for this. These really specific cleaning questions. It's definitely going to take some time for people to do research and for information to be available. There's literally one study that's been peer reviewed on how long this virus stays active on certain surfaces. You've probably all seen that in the news, but it's important to keep in mind it's literally one study, and our knowledge is going to evolve on this over the next few months. I'm sure people are working on this very quickly, or at least as quickly as possible. Looks like the next question we had in here that just to bring us back to some of the Canadian specific issues. I have a question here about the CERB eligibility. So I'll just read this as it stands and see if anyone would like to speak to it. The question is, how are business owners dealing with the CERB ineligibility? Under the current verbiage, the wage subsidy makes the owner ineligible for CERB, as does online sales and membership dues, because it's classified as work or the business not being closed. Does anyone have any experience with making those applications or talking to folks about their eligibility for that program? Yeah, and I guess that program's only been available for a week as well, so I'm sure maybe some of those rules are evolving. All right. Here's another interesting one. So we've got another question. Would you add a COVID-19 risk of exposure to your waiver? Done quite a bit of research on this topic lately for the U.S. insurance market, and most insurance policies already have an exclusion for communicable diseases that would normally apply to this, and that would reduce your liability to your customers, but also to your employees if there isn't a known risk anyway. But does anyone know specifically for any of your Canadian insurance policies whether there's either upcoming language or existing language that helps with your reduce your risk exposure to COVID-19?
I'm not aware of there being any of that in my insurance things.
Okay.
Something to consider, sorry, Garnet, just jumping in, is that from what I've heard from a couple of different medical professionals on the front lines, is that it's really hard to prove where you got COVID-19. The incubation stage is just so long, potentially it can be up to 2 weeks, that it doesn't really pose a big liability threat to a small business, even if it is a business that has a contact sport, where it's like climbing where everyone's touching the same holds. It's just impossible really for someone to point to your business and say, this is where I got it. So I don't know that legalese built into the waiver pertaining to COVID specifically is something that you really need to worry about too much.
All right, thank you. On that same insurance topic, does anyone out there have experience with business disruption insurance or business loss of income insurance, or the two common phrases for those policies? That's been a contentious thing down here in the States, but I'd love to hear what you guys are experiencing up there.
I've been paying for it for 20 years, and it's not getting a penny for it. It's specifically being excluded, and it is actually in there when you read the deep contract. Being public health emergencies is excluded. So there you go.
Oh, interesting. That was the phrasing that your underwriter used, was public health emergencies.
Yeah, public health emergency, a couple of other things, enough that made me realize that it's maybe not as useful as I had hoped it had been all those years of paying the bills.
Some guidance. Oh, yes. Sorry, Walson. You were about to.
Yeah, I just got off the phone with our insurance. Yeah, I just got off the phone with our insurance agent before we met here today. I just had information on our side, but yeah, it's not exactly covered under an act of God, but it's not. We're not seeing a penny either, and we're not getting any breaks in our payment when we're closed so far. So they don't know for sure if our underwriter will allow us to take that break, even though all our doors are closed.
Oh, actually, on that topic, my conversation with my insurance agent became one about whether my insurance need to go up, because now it was a vacant building. So I assured them that I have a staff person come in to the building, so it's not a vacant building, because supposedly if your building is empty for 30 days, your insurance gets to go up. So there's no winning.
Yeah. Oh, I guess one comment I'll make on this, I don't know how applicable it would be in Canada, but same story down here in the States. Basically, everyone is being told that their claims around business loss of income insurance or business disruption insurance won't be successful. The general guidance from insurance companies that we work with at the CWA, and I've seen this from a number of different associations as well, is that it's best to make those claims and force the insurance company to deny them. Then if there's any expansion or rules changes on the national level around what the insurance companies actually are allowed to do, then you'd have a stronger case to then retroactively have those claims be fulfilled. I would probably check with your with your local agent to see if that holds true up in Canada as well. But that just to share what I'm hearing down here in the States anyway. That's generally what we recommend is just file the claim, and even if they have to deny it, at least it's there as it being on the record. Let's see. Here's an interesting question. I have no idea how to answer, so hopefully someone will be able to step in with some ideas. Has anyone out there heard of talk about interest abatement at the Bank of Canada level? I'm not sure if that's an interest abatement for existing loans or around any of the stimulus loan packages. All right. That's all right.
I don't know if I can answer that question, but I can definitely say that we have talked to our banker about deferring the cost, and they have given us, and the government as well has given us the opportunity to postpone our payments if required. The only disadvantage, which is that it doesn't postpone the interest, so the interest will continue to accrue. So in some ways, for us, it's just better just to continue to pay for your loan as opposed to get further debt from the accrued interest.
Okay, great. Thanks, Walson. This will be another question I think you'll have some good insight on. Is about having gym workers in the gym while it's closed. So is there any guidance on having staff working in the gym while we are ordered to close? Having setters work on maintenance or cleaning or resetting things. And you've had some experience with this on the construction side, Walson. Are there what kind of extra precautions are you putting in place for workers who need to be in gyms while they're closed?
Yeah, so our route setters actually came up with a really good instead of having Rocky will sometimes have 6 to 7 route setters in there per day. They've reduced the number to 4 so that it's easier to manage and do their distancing. They're working in different quadrants of the gym as well. They're not hanging from rope side to side or working on boulder problems beside each other. As for managers and directors, they're just keeping a safe distance from each other.
Okay. Does anyone else out there have staff who are currently working inside the gym while it's closed, either on maintenance projects or even just coming into an office?
If I can, this is
Yes.
Genevieve. In Montreal, we have nobody left. In Quebec, the rules became very strict. It was like gatherings of 2 people, and there's severe fines and stuff like that being handed out. So we mostly work from home, those of us who can. But while we could, they were resetting. In Halifax, it's gatherings of 5 or more, and they have to social distance, and we are finishing the construction. So there are people still working in the gym, but nobody's setting right now. It's just like finishing construction and stuff like that. So it's I guess it would vary based on province.
Yeah, and similar here in the States. It's just depends state to state what the current rules are. I guess the one thing I would say on that is definitely pay attention to any guidance from OHS. I believe it is in Canada. We have OSHA down here in the U.S. OSHA is put out in the U.S. and I know OHS has some guidance on what different risk levels are for different types of employees. So it could be the risk level and the duty of care you have to your front desk staff might be different than your route setters. So I would pay attention to any sort of like PPE suggestions or requirements they have there, because if you don't provide that for your staff in those particular categories, then you could potentially face some backlash. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, to John Mark mostly. You know, Jean, how is it with the construction and renovations in your areas? Are you affected? I know that when Flash went down, they flipped a coin. They got the night shift to install the floor at one of your facilities, as opposed to during the day.
Yeah, I don't even
Do you
think they
find
got
that it's difficult, or?
I don't even think they got the benefit of a coin flip. We just assumed because they were on mountain time that they could start a bit later. But yeah, it was. I mean, thankfully the crews were, both the Delir crew and the Flash crew. Everyone was super good and proactive. Basically, we're almost done the facility in Halifax, and as our goal is to get it basically ready to open, other than setting, and then just wait until we're allowed to open. So, and in terms of we're doing other projects in Montreal and in Langford, and Montreal, we just hit the big old pause button because we were just about to start work, and so the landlord and contractor just said, okay, well, let's just hit pause and talk in a month or a month and a half or whenever things kind of start to come back together. And then in Langford, they're still building the building because construction is still going. So hasn't, and that's not planned to be open for another little while. So we're not too affected. But I would say that, as Jen said, per province, it seems to be pretty different. Like in Victoria or on Vancouver Island, construction seems to be just going ahead like as normal for most construction sites. Whereas I know that in Toronto, like Home Depots are closed and you can't do much. So it really varies, but yeah, that's about it.
No problems with inspectors or anything like that?
Sorry, you were cutting out there.
I think the question was about inspectors.
You're not having any problems with inspectors, or?
No, because in Halifax we have we're respecting the 5-person maximum in the building, and so I think we're technically allowed to keep going until we have, as long as we're respecting that. But yeah, no, there's no. In Victoria, they're not even giving parking tickets, so it's it's great. You can go around downtown, park wherever you want.
All right. Well, the last question I think we're going to have time for on this call will be that if gyms do reopen in the near future, do you guys have the right to screen visitors to the facility? It looks like Walson has some insight to that.
Yeah, Casey, we've had incidences where we had to screen some people, not in this environment, but we did look into it. And because we're a private facility, we can screen whoever we want. If you're referring to decide, but really, if you're making that precaution, if you're a private facility, then it shouldn't be an issue. However, if you're working for a university or something like that, it may be different.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave that there for for this call, I'm going to throw a little poll up just to make sure this was useful for all you guys. And if you'd like, feel free to contact us and let us know any other questions you have around Canada specifically. Some of the broader questions around cleaning, member engagement, we're covering those on our regular webinar series. So definitely pay attention to that. We also have recordings of all of our past webinars. So as we keep developing these, just keep sharing ideas with us, and we'll be sending out emails. Keep an eye on our social media posts for guidance. We have blog articles coming out multiple times a week on different topics around reopening, cleaning, hygiene, general business policies. So anything like that you'd like to see us produce specifically for Canada, just reach out, let us know, and we'll do our best to make that happen. You can always contact any of us directly. Yes.
If I could make a request of everybody. So while we're all thinking now about reopening, I would recommend that we all have some staged opening, some low density openings, some medium density opening processes, and then full opening processes. Because I think Jean-Marc's comment earlier that there's going to be waves, it's going to be coming back. I think that in order to avoid being asked to close down again, I think we need to show the capacity to adjust up and down along with risk. I think that we're going to have to push against the idea that risk is either 100% or zero, and start thinking about what are the in-between things that you could do as a facility so that we can step down a step instead of closing the doors entirely if we need to in the future. And I think also then when we're communicating to our people to open, the things that we do at the very beginning to assure people when we decide it's time for us to stop doing those, it's that people understand that it was part of a deliberate process that we thought about of stepping away from risk instead of us just doing this thing that we said was important and now suddenly we're not doing it. Think about what the whole long process is going to look like, not just what it's going to look like when you open your doors for the first time. July.
I just wanted to, I think that this is going to be important too because of also community backlash. I don't know if everyone experienced it, but like when there was a lot of pressure also from certain members of the community to close and reopening, I mean, was a part of the discussion when we were discussing closing before we were forced to, is the harder difference, one of the harder decisions about closing is like when do you reopen and facing the backlash with that. So I think that Kenneth, what you're saying is really important because we're going to basically have to have like a community message out there to say like, here's what we're doing to mitigate the risk. So that one gym is not, because backlash on one gym could mean backlash on the whole community basically. So the whole industry of gyms.
If I may, yeah, exactly. I would love to, if CAC can help manage or centralize that effort into having a cohesive voice for all the gym owners. I would love to do that. I would love to help. I think that, like I suggested earlier, the best way to approach this would have some sort of task force with a couple of gym owners, ideally from different provinces that have different regulations. We can come together and talk this through and look at different scenario and come up with a proposal. Yes, and the PSO would be also welcome on this task force. Anyhow, I'm willing to lead this. Anybody interested in it, please send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat box. And I think we could get something on the ground this week and start talking about Kenneth's extremely on-point suggestion. I think we could detail those on paper and share them with the community. Definitely, I'm on board with that if you are.
Great. Yeah, thanks everyone. And I think that those kind of questions are, they might have some small amounts of local government flavor that you might take into account, but they're very broadly international questions. We're definitely talking about things like that with our gyms here. And as we start to look forward and past the current pandemic, it's highly on highly in our attention at the CWA to provide that kind of information as well. So keep in tune to future webinars. We'll probably have webinars like specifically on this topic so that people can share various ideas and we can kind of all approach this cohesively as an industry together. So again, thank you all for joining the call. Feel free to contact us directly with those kind of ideas. Let us know if you liked this call, if you'd like to have another call focused specifically on Canadian topics, or even any specific topics that we might have covered today. We can go into deeper depths as well and provide some more insight or find some experts to speak to you guys as well. With that, we'll end this call for today and be in touch and stay well. Talk to you later. Bye.